We're continuing our series, Turning to God in Troubled Times, working through the Old Testament prophet of Habakkuk. And to set the scene a little bit, really, I want to share a little bit about my previous work life when I used to be a secondary school teacher. And I think before I share this story, it's important to say I did really enjoy being a teacher, generally. You'll see why I add that little caveat, just to be clear. Teaching one class was really difficult, 9S3. I still remember it. I don't think I can remember the number, letters of all the other classes, but 9S3, they stick out in my mind. Like, I had some difficult classes over my years teaching, but 9S3, I think, was the only class I ever had where I don't think I taught them anything. I was very unsuccessful as their teacher. That's year 9s, so 13 and 14-year-olds, if you're not familiar with our school system, that pointless school year where you're settled enough in school that you've got plenty of energy to cause trouble, but you don't have enough focus of exams or things that actually matter, so you basically just cause chaos. And so that year, I tried everything I could with this class to control the classroom, but I was just constantly dealing with minor disruptive behavior. Like, to be honest, it was nothing that terrible. I just couldn't get on top enough of the minor disruptive behavior to actually effectively teach the class. I tried to be fair and remain calm, but it was just so hard, and it felt like I was being constantly mocked, really, by this class. And I remember one lesson where one of the actually probably nicer kids in that class said something to me like, "They're owning you, sir. You're getting owned. Like, why don't you just give one of them a whack and that would sort them out?" And that is not how my teaching career ended. That's not why I'm not a teacher anymore. I did not take his advice, just to be really clear. However, I just had to absorb the mocking, toughen up, and just come back again and again. There's no, like, if you're a teacher, I understand what it's like, and I think many secondary school teachers have been through that at some point in their career. And to be honest, it was in my first year of teaching, and I probably would have been able to handle it better a bit further on, but once you get into that cycle as a teacher, it's quite hard to get out. And I've called this morning, God is not mocked. Because you see, God is not like a teacher who's lost control of his worldwide classroom. It's not like he's lost control. He knows what he's doing and will bring justice in every sense one day. Justice will be done and be seen to be done. God is not mocked. So just to catch you up into Habakkuk, it's quite a book, really, quite a tough book. And it's led us to conclude that it's all right to ask God difficult questions when we're going through trouble. And we've seen that Habakkuk, appalled by the state of his nation, Israel, has passionately and honestly appealed to God to come and revive their country, to come and bring justice. And God's response to Habakkuk's request to bring change in the nation is staggering and really challenging when you read it, because he basically says, I'm going to raise up a really, really evil nation called the Babylonians, and they're going to train and judge my people. And you're like, what? This just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense to us. How much less sense would it have made to poor Habakkuk as he received this quite clear but staggeringly bizarre answer from God? You see, the thing is, God is so much in control that he can use anyone or any situation, be they evil or good, to achieve his purposes. So today, as we come to the second part of chapter 2, really, we're going to see how the Babylonians will by no means get away with their evil actions. If God does choose to use evil people or evil situations, that doesn't in some sort of odd way sanctify that situation and make it good. It doesn't in some way make that person all right before God just because he's used them, even though they are completely evil. God will bring judgment and judge all those who do evil. He is not mocked. Justice will be done. And the passage we're going to look at today contains 5 woes that God speaks out against the Babylonians, and really, for that matter, all future evil nations and empires. I was joking with Jude during the week about how this talk really, it feels like when you call a talk God is not mocked, that you kind of need like to put on quite a strong, shouty type preacher voice and kind of pound the lectern, God is not mocked. But actually, really, as you look at this passage, What's really interesting is that it would be to completely misread the tone of the passage. It's true, God is not mocked, but what we have here are 5 woes spoken by God, and woe could be translated, alas. It expresses sorrow, grief, concern, sadness. This is God lamenting over the fact that he has to judge the wicked and evil. He takes no delight, he takes no pleasure in having to bring about this judgment. Nevertheless, this works, as we'll see, out as a devastating reminder of God's divine judgment. So we're going to break the passage down into the different woes and then make some more general points. So I'm going to read the passage in the sections highlighting the different woes as we go. So the first and second woe I've described as unjust economics. Verse 6, so Habakkuk 2, verse 6 to 11. Will not all of them taunt him with ridicule and scorn, saying, woe to him who piles up stolen goods and makes himself wealthy by extortion? How long must this go on? Will not your creditors suddenly arise? Will they not wake up and make you tremble? Then you will become their prey. Because you have plundered many nations, the peoples who are left will plunder you. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. Woe to him who builds his houses by unjust gain, setting his nest on high to escape the clutches of ruin. You have plotted the ruin of many peoples, shaming your own house and forfeiting your life. The stone wall will cry out, and the beams of the woodwork will echo it. So the Babylonians were making economic gains by violence, plundering and extorting other nations, building up their wealth, their cities, their homes, at the cost of the livelihood, safety, and even lives of others, profiting from human misery, pain, and death. And what I want to do as I go through each of these is I think it's very easy to read this kind of passage in the Bible and hold them over here, like this is irrelevant for us today. But actually, let's just think about it for a moment. We live in a time when economics are highly unjust. The richest 1% of our world have more wealth than the bottom 95% of the population of the world put together. The COVID pandemic created 40 new pharmaceutical billionaires, literally profiting from the pain and misery of others. We regularly hear of banks and businesses doing dodgy things to maximize their profits. And all of this is without getting into the kind of murkier world of crime, drugs, money laundering, or the nations where the very heart of government and authority is completely corrupt. But back then and today, God is not mocked. God will bring justice to those who deal in unjust economics. The third woe, slave labor or ruling by violence. Woe to him who builds up a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by injustice. Has not the Lord Almighty determined that the people's labor is only fuel for the fire, that the nations exhaust themselves for nothing? Then verse 14, a bit of light amongst the darkness. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. We'll come back to 14. Human life has a high price in God's eyes. When blood is shed, God doesn't look on uninterested. Those who were not killed were enslaved by the Babylonians to build towns, cities, make them profit on their behalf. They had slaves from many other nations. And again, straight to jump to our context today, we don't in any way live in a world free from slavery. It's estimated there are 50 million modern-day slaves around the world today. Horrific, isn't it? In the UK alone, in 2021, 12,000 victims were referred to the authorities, and it's estimated there could be as many as 130,000 trapped in slavery today in our nation. It's easy to think this is not relevant to us. It's very relevant. God is not mocked. Modern day slavery doesn't go unnoticed by God, just as what the Babylonians were doing didn't go unnoticed by God. Justice will be done. The fourth woe, irresponsible leaders. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbors, pouring it from the wineskin till they are drunk, so they can gaze on their naked bodies. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. Now it's your turn. Drink and let your nakedness be exposed. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around to you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and your destruction of animals will terrify you. For you have shed human blood, you have destroyed lands and cities and everyone in them. So while many, many people in their empire were suffering, the king and all his officials and other leaders and important people were abusing alcohol and partying. They were using violence as a means of ensuring they got exactly what they wanted. God is not mocked. As these leaders have done shameful things, they will get their fill of shame instead of glory. That's what it says here, really clearly. Again, sadly not difficult to bring it into our context today. Partying of political leaders during COVID perhaps stands out as an obvious example in our nation alone, without even starting to think about nations where it's more corrupt. And God is not mocked. Irresponsible leaders will be held to account for their leadership of nations. The fifth woe, idolatry, starting from verse 18. Of what value is an idol carved by a craftsman, or an image that teaches lies? For the one who makes it trusts in his own creation. He makes idols that cannot speak. Woe to him who says to wood, come to life, or to lifeless stone, wake up. Can it give guidance? It's covered with gold and silver. There is no breath in it. And before I read verse 20, we come to another one of those verses that's a light amongst this dark passage. The Lord's is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. We come to the conclusion of this passage. There's this reminder. God is on his throne. Nothing happens without him being aware of it. Nothing is going to be left unjudged and unsorted out by the God who sits in his throne. Yes, there's mystery to it. Yes, there's things we can't understand, but there comes a moment where all we can do is sit in stunned silence and awe before our God who is on his throne. Yes, we don't get it all, but he's there. He's in control. And with this fifth woe, idolatry, we can very easily make the jump and assume this one's not relevant to us. I'm pretty sure none of you have spent your weekend carving, creating some kind of household gods, objects. However, anything can become an idol. Financial prosperity, owning a big, secure home, comfort, feeling powerful, having power over other people, career success. Most of the things I've just listed there aren't bad. But if they kind of rise up in our order of priorities and in our hearts to when they become the most significant thing to us, then we start worshipping them, because that's all of us worship something. And when something gets to that top level, that it captures our imagination, our hearts to a greater level than Jesus, then it's become an idol. And in many ways, this one's the engine that drives all the other woes that we see, as what we worship drives all our priorities. Something that captures us to a level where we give our attention and time to it, and that's what we want so much that we don't care about other people anymore. We don't care about this anymore. We just care about achieving what we want, satisfying our heart's desire. So, don't really have time to unpack that one as much as I'd like, but is worshipping God our top priority? Are there any idols competing for our heart and affection, our imagination, that really should only be reserved for Jesus? Are there even good things that have kind of crept up too high in the priority order? So history teaches us that many nations and empires head the way of Babylon. So this is far from just really being about Babylon. You could take this and apply it again and again to empires that have risen and fallen throughout history. So the 3 points I want to draw out, I think, want to take it even beyond just being relevant to our nation or relevant to empires, And what can we draw out of this for us today? And the first one I want to say is justice will be done and seen to be done. Again, just to put it in the context, I don't think God delights in this as he talks about these woes. He is lamenting that this is what is necessary. It's breaking his heart. God is sad that this is what he's having to express. Ezekiel 33:11 perhaps captures that quite well. As surely as I live, declares the Lord Almighty, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that they turn from their ways and live. Turn. God's heart is that everyone would come to know him, and living in our day, we know how that's possible through what Jesus has done. No one is beyond the reach of God's love and saving grace. So justice will be done and seen to be done. I had an appointment at a hospital this week, which I told you about at the start. Wasn't planning on, but I did. And when I arrived at the hospital at the Northern, I'd arrived in plenty of time to look for a parking space, but it's often really hard to find one there. I found someone leaving, so there was no one else around that person, so I kind of positioned my car, made it really clear from my position of the car, the indicator, etc., that I was going for that space, so I was aligning myself up for it. And there was no one else around when I started doing this, but the person leaving was taking quite a while to leave, and suddenly I said someone honking their horn, and realised it was someone right behind me honking their horn at me. I was like, oh, just go ignore them. There's plenty of, if they want to go past, there's a ton load of room for them to get past. I don't know what their problem is. So I just ignored him. Then he did pull past me, and I thought, oh, fine. But then he pulled just past me and then reversed back towards my car. And I'm like, what's he doing? Then the person who was leaving then did pull out of their space, and this person nicked the space right in front of me. As you can see, I'm not at all annoyed about it. Didn't bother me at all. And so I didn't do anything outwardly silly. I moved on to look for another space. Inwardly, though, different story. I was really, really cross about this. And I happened to see these three parking attendants walking around the car park, which is, I don't think something I've ever noticed at the Northern before, but in their high-vis jackets, going around checking people's tickets. And again, didn't do anything about this. This didn't actually happen. But in my mind, I started to go, wouldn't it be amazing if they gave him a ticket? Wouldn't it be amazing if for some reason he got a parking ticket? And this didn't, I don't think this actually happened. I've no idea. But I found strange comfort in that kind of, an enjoyment in that kind of thought. That would be really good, wouldn't it? That would be so funny. I'd love that. That would teach him for ignoring standard British car parking etiquette. And just the thought grew and grew. I mean, I was waiting for an appointment. I had plenty of time to think it over. I know it's a trivial example, but I've deliberately picked a trivial example here. As the point I want to make from it, I think is perhaps almost more obvious with a trivial example than a serious one. When we or someone we love is mistreated, there's often a sense of injustice that can rise up quickly in our hearts. And often our sense of injustice will be accurate, I don't think I was wrong. I think I was mistreated in the car park by what happened. However, my desire to kind of fantasize about it and think about this person getting a parking ticket is really just a bit vindictive and just a desire for my own personal satisfaction. Finding comfort in that and finding a sense of vindication in knowing that someone else was getting what I felt they deserved maybe isn't a very healthy way to process experiencing injustice. So when we speak about wanting justice, it's worth just considering a little bit more sometimes what we actually mean. So theologian D.A. Carson makes the point that when we ask for justice, we often make three assumptions, and he lays them out. First of all, I want this justice to be dispensed immediately. We'll come back to that one in a moment. Justice immediately probably means we get destroyed. We'll come back to that in a moment. I want justice in this instance, but not necessarily every instance. I.e. with the car parking, let's face it, there's probably been times when I haven't exactly followed kind of parking etiquette in different situations. Maybe not quite, I can't remember myself ever doing anything like what I've just described, just to be clear. But there must have been times when I've been quite needy of space and probably pushed it a bit. So I don't want justice in those instances, just this one. I thirdly presuppose that in this instance I've grasped the situation correctly. So I don't know what was going on. This could have genuinely been an emergency happening. It was a hospital car park after all. I don't know that. He looked quite well, so I don't think it was, but it could have been. Again, I've got it. I understand it. But that's what happens in our hearts, isn't it? And he goes on further to explore these assumptions. Justice, instantaneously applied only when it favors me, is not justice at all. Selective justice that favors one individual above another is simply another name for corruption. And no one wants a corrupt God. I know I've made those assumptions at times. Demonstrated to you how I've done it even this week. We all do. You see, while we won't understand all the mysteries around evil that people seemingly get away with in this life, the Bible does teach that all evil will one day be dealt with for good. All evil is under God's judgment. And don't think for a moment this is like an Old Testament thing, New Testament thing. The New Testament makes it really clear that God will judge all. Look at history, nation after nation, empire after empire that's risen up only to fall. They all had great success, but in God's bigger perspective, their success was but for a moment from his eternal perspective. Their success is just an instant. Whereas through his son Jesus, he is establishing a kingdom that will uphold justice and righteousness forevermore. As we often read in familiar verses in Isaiah at Christmas. God will see that justice is done. And at the end of time, we'll be able to see that justice has been done as well. And it's right at times for us to seek justice. It's certainly right at times for us to seek justice on behalf of others, especially the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized. I wish we could speak more about that, but I'm not sure that's what this passage is exactly about this morning. However, when we're seeking justice that in some way benefits me, we would be wise to check our hearts to make sure we understand what we really mean. I think there's less need for checking of hearts when we're seeking justice on behalf of others, when there's no benefit to us. But checking our hearts that we aren't looking for some sort of vindication or personal satisfaction, that we aren't thinking that we're entitled to something that we're totally not entitled to and don't necessarily deserve more than anyone else. Don't misunderstand me. I don't in any way want to discourage anyone from reporting crime, abuse, or things that are wrong to the appropriate people. Even when that's happened to us, it's right to do that. That's not the point here. This is about hearts and making sure our hearts are kept soft before God's. So when we're considering this point, God is going to bring about justice. Justice will be done. So we don't have to go out and sort out justice for ourselves and seek vindication for ourselves and personal satisfaction for ourselves in a moment. Because it will be done. It will be sorted. And so we've looked at like justice will be done and seen to be done. I realize we're going to move through some quite big topics pretty rapidly. It could leave you with a question of kind of like, I thought God was supposed to be loving. This doesn't sound like the God that we often talk about. Well, I want to make the point that actually love and justice are far more connected than we realize. Love cries out for justice. When we think of evil being dealt with, justice being done, it's perhaps natural to think of law courts. Most famous law courts in our land are the Old Bailey. There's a picture of them, I believe, and a picture of the top of the law courts. The statue there is a statue of Lady Justice. So she holds a sword in one hand and scales in another. I think it's kind of meant to be a personification of the moral force of the criminal justice system, the original idea taken from Roman mythology. So in the one hand, you hold these scales weighing the evidence for and against each case, and then a sword, I guess, showing the judgment that can be enacted. And does the evidence weigh in favor of the defendants or not? We might demand justice, but justice alone will not help us in the face of God's righteousness and holy perfection. Justice alone will not help us at all. Because the Bible doesn't pick on anyone, but puts us all on the same level playing field. So if you look through Romans 3, for example, it says, there is no one righteous, not even one. A little later, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. On our own terms, we have no right to imagine that we can share in God's glory in any sense, and the scales will never tip in our favour in that judgment if you imagine Lady Justice's scales. Fortunately, God doesn't work like Lady Justice. He has a different plan. So D.A. Carson again, which is really just a split part from the previous quote, justice alone will destroy us all. Only the triumph of justice and love will meet our needs, and the triumph is so integrally linked to the very heart of the gospel. The cross of God's dear Son, our Saviour, Jesus Christ, that we dare not as Christians take our eyes off that perspective. So when we look to the cross, we see both justice and love meeting. And as Nicky Gumbel, church leader and founder of the Alpha Course, puts it, love without concern for justice is not true love, as love cries out for justice. That's true on a human level, isn't it? To be concerned about someone who's facing injustice, but not desire to see them see justice, isn't probably really an expression of love at all. But it's also true for God. Love cries out for justice. And at the cross, God provides both. The ultimate expression of his love as the sinless one gives his life for those of us who will always fall short. And justice is done as he pays the price for our sin. The price has been paid. Justice is dealt with. Justice has not been left uncovered because the price has been paid on our behalf for our sin. The only way anyone can stand before God and be righteous and be accepted is through Jesus. Justice alone will destroy us. We need his love as well. We need his love and his justice. And if you've never given your life to Jesus, you could do that even here this morning. He loves you. He's for you. And as we read earlier, he takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. He longs for all to come and know him and walk with him so that you can know his love, so that you can know his justice at work in your life. And as we know and experience and benefit from God's justice and love, it makes it possible for us to keep loving, keep seeking justice together for others as well. It makes it possible to follow in Jesus' footsteps, who modeled the perfect example of how to love people and seek justice for them all at the same time. The final point I want to make is God's glory will fill the whole earth. Or we could put it, there is certainty about where all this is heading. We know where all this is going. So the Bible clearly teaches that one day this cycle of rising and falling nations and empires will come to an end. And there'll be a day when all evil is dealt with for good. And as it said in verse 14 in this passage, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. So the glory of the Lord is his special presence amongst his people, his holy presence amongst his people, which in the Old Testament was often seen in the temple, in the tabernacle, whereas now we get to encounter that by the Holy Spirit in each and every one of our lives when we trust Jesus and invite him to come in. What a privilege, what an honor. And as the waters cover the sea, slightly odd phrase, the waters are the sea, right? So all the sea, I've got to get that right, all the sea is water. I was going to nearly say it the other way around, which wouldn't be true. Not all the water is the sea. All the sea is water. The point is there would be no room for anything else. God's glory would fill the earth in such a way that there is no space for anything else. There's a day coming when God's kingdom will be the only kingdom, when all other kingdoms are swallowed up, when he's the only one who can make a claim that he's reigning and ruling. All evil will be dealt with, justice will be done. And it's important to note that knowledge here, as in many other places in the Bible, Don't for a moment think theoretical head knowledge. This isn't speaking about information we store in our heads. Commentators explain that this word indicates an intimate, personal interaction between two people in detail and depth. So don't be thrown off by that word. This is talking about personal relationship with God. So the knowledge of God's glory is going to spread to cover the whole earth as more and more people come to know and love Jesus. And for sure, we won't know that to the fullest extent until Jesus returns again. But even in the here and now, we get the privilege as more people come to know Jesus to see his kingdom expanding, to see the knowledge of his glory spreading all around the world. Trusting him that one day when he returns, we'll see that in all its fullness. So as we come to a close then, a couple of things to help us land this. Firstly, are we trusting God for answers in his timing and for his glory, rather than trusting God for answers right now and for our personal satisfaction and vindication? Tough question for you to take away with you, perhaps. I'm not sure you're going to ground that one out in the few moments we have now. But I think it's worth us considering that, particularly perhaps in moments where we're feeling like we faced injustice in our lives in some way. Verse 20 again from earlier, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. So we've seen in this series that it is okay to dare to ask God why. There comes a point, though, as we look at God in his holiness and his perfection, where the only appropriate response is, I don't get all this, I'm just sitting there in stunned silence before him, remembering and looking on in awe and wonder, remembering that he is the one who's in control. He is the one that we can trust, that he does know what he's doing. He will bring to justice every form of injustice. Every evil will be put right. We might not understand it all now. There will come a day when that's done, when it will all make sense. He will bring justice in his time and his way. Come back to verse 20 again in a sec, actually. And finally, the righteous will live by faith. Drawing on a verse that we actually looked at last time as part of the earlier part of chapter 2. So Stephen, when he spoke 2 weeks ago, explored this, and I'm not going to unpack it in detail now. And perhaps the primary application of this is faith in Jesus and trusting him. This verse is taken from the Old Testament, applied in the New Testament in Romans by Paul, putting our trust, putting our faith in Jesus and living according to him. This is associated right with the core of the gospel in the New Testament. But I want us to think beyond that initial trust in Jesus as well. As we land this, there's a need for day-by-day faith in living for him. It's important that we learn to trust God when life gets tough, learn to ask difficult questions and process stuff so that we can deal with disappointment, challenges, continue to live by faith, the things that we've been looking at in the previous two talks we've done in this series. There comes a moment, though, where there's need to go, I'm going to continue to live by faith. I'm going to continue to step out in faith. I'm going to go again. Even though I've prayed for healing lots and lots of times and nothing seems to have happened, I'm going to ask for prayer again for healing. Even though this difficult situation's not changed, I'm going to keep trusting God. I'm going to keep by living by faith in that moment. I'm going to keep praying for change in our nation. I'm going to keep praying against the injustice that I see around me. The choice to keep going by faith day by day.